Wake up. We're here. Why are you shaking? Are you okay? Stand up. There you go. Not even last night's storm could wake you. Don't worry, the Elder Scrolls Online reveal was all just a dream. Also, Bethesda just announced that they're remaking Oblivion, and they've hired you as lead writer. Quiet. Here comes Todd Howard. I'll implement every one of your ideas, no matter how impractical or expensive they are. Crap. Another one of those dreams. The Elder Scrolls series consists of 5 RPGs and various spin-off games made by Bethesda. They're about a bunch of scrolls that are really, really old. In addition to the scrolls, there are also sword fights and skeletons and stuff. The games share several common qualities. They all take place in different parts of the same world, they generally feature sandbox-style gameplay, they're usually played from a first-person perspective, and there's usually at least one thing about them that's really irritating. I want to use the Elder Scrolls games to talk about the importance of setting. And to talk about the importance of setting, I'm going to kick it old school. Early 19th century old school. Part 1. The 3 levels of suspension of disbelief. This is Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Coleridge is an English dude who's been dead a powerful long time, but back when he was alive, he wrote a lot of poetry. He and some of his friends were instrumental in founding the Romantic movement, a literary movement that sometimes made use of folklore and supernatural elements. But this movement reached its peak during the first half of the 19th century, a period after the Age of Enlightenment, a period when the typical reader of poetry or fiction was not likely to believe in things like witches or magic. If you wanted to write about stuff like that, you needed an excuse. So Coleridge came up with one in his book Biographica Literaria, where he coined a phrase that's still with us today: suspension of disbelief. When you read a story about a guy that can fly and shoot lasers from his eyes, despite the fact that people can't really do that, you're suspending your disbelief. You're willingly accepting the unbelievable parts of a story. Through suspension of disbelief, supernatural or unreal elements in stories have a means to exist. After 150 years, this concept had gained enough experience points to level up to level 2. Secondary belief. This new term was coined by J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien wrote a series of stories that not only had occasional supernatural elements, they took place in an entirely separate world, the world of Middle-earth. He called this the secondary world. He said, inside it, what the author relates is true. It accords with the laws of that world. You therefore believe it while you are, as it were, inside. The moment disbelief arises, the spell is broken. The magic, or rather art, has failed. You are then out in the primary world again, looking at the little abortive secondary world from outside. It accords with the laws of that world. For Tolkien, internal consistency was key. Placing a story in a fantastic world doesn't mean that anything can happen. It only means that you're changing certain limited things about the premise of a setting. This is why many people notice how implausible it is that no one can tell that Clark Kent is Superman. These same people are fine with flying and eye lasers, but not the transparency of Superman's disguise. That's because we accept flying and eye lasers as part of our implicit agreement with the author. We don't accept that everyone in Metropolis is so dense that a famous superhero can fool them all by putting on a pair of glasses. The narrative tension this creates has to be dissolved somehow, in this case by making it a running joke, a wink at the audience. Nonetheless, it demonstrates how secondary belief has to be carefully managed or the spell will be broken. The magic, or rather art, will fail. The concept of secondary belief has guided generations of authors and led to the accumulation of a body of knowledge on properly building a constructed world or con world. It also spent months training in Siberia, doing pull-ups, carrying logs through the snow, and throwing rocks into a thing until it advanced to level 3, immersion. This word is usually used in the context of games, but it can be thought of as an extension of suspension of disbelief and secondary belief. In a computer or video game, you don't just witness the story, you participate in it, so your belief in the world of that story is that much more important. This can be a difficult thing to describe, so instead I'll use an example. In Half-Life 2, you start the game dropped in an unfamiliar place. an Eastern European-looking city run by a menacing police state. A sense of constant surveillance and scrutiny is communicated to the player in a half-dozen ways, and it's clear that this is not a friendly place. Fortunately, your friend Barney helps you escape the bad guys, and you skulk away through a courtyard and a couple of doors. Whenever I play this section, I always close the doors behind me, because I don't want to leave any clues that I was there. It's not that I think this will actually make any difference in gameplay. In fact, I know it won't. But the atmosphere is such that I want to act in a way that enhances my belief in the setting, and through it, my immersion in the game. I become a willing participant in the storytelling process. Part 2. Alright, the Elder Scrolls games. In this case, the third one. Morrowind takes place in the far-off land of Morrowind. It's not your usual RPG setting. It's full of giant mushrooms, volcanic ash, obnoxious flying lizard things, and surly locals. The native religion is the Tribunal Temple, which worships Morrowind's 3 living gods. To join this religion, you have to complete a quest called the 7 Graces, which takes you all over the island on a religious pilgrimage. In other words, you have to deliver some random item to some random out-of-the-way spot on the map. In pure gameplay terms, most of this quest is nothing but busy work. All you do is drop off a piece of plant or wax or something at some shrine out in the middle of nowhere, then read a text box, or don't, it doesn't matter, and you have to do this 7 times. Sounds awful, right? But this is one of my favorite quests in any game. All the flavor and setting detail make it a unique experience. You get a sense of the history and character of the Tribunal Temple, as well as backstory details that will come into play later. Sometimes I drop all my gear off somewhere before I do this quest and complete it with just the shirt on my back. Why? Because it seems like I should. Because the Tribunal faith has an ascetic quality to it, and I feel like this is what a religious pilgrim would actually do. When I play Morrowind, I do things like this to deepen my immersion in the game. I'm encouraged to do so, and rewarded for doing so, by the depth and quality of the setting. I've always felt that in this game the setting is the story, and that story is one of cultural stagnation. The once vibrant Dunmer have become resentful, xenophobic, and mired in tradition. It's the story of a collective fall from grace brought about by a terrible crime and the lie that was built to hide it. The story of a present dominated by the past. When you ask people why they like Morrowind, it's often hard to get a satisfying answer because this quality is hard to describe. You'll often hear that Morrowind was cool because of the giant mushrooms. Well, giant mushrooms are cool, but they're only part of a larger picture. The larger picture is the hard work and creativity that went into everything about the game world. The things that make the player able to sustain all 3 levels of suspension of disbelief throughout their experience. When the developers take the time to design several different architectural styles and write volumes of backstory and folklore and dialogue they have no guarantee you'll see or books they have no guarantee you'll read, all of that effort has a payoff. The payoff is that the player believes in the world. The complexity and nuance of the setting give it verisimilitude. Verisimilitude is an abbreviation of the phrase verisimulation, dude, which is what surfers say to each other after reading particularly well-crafted alternate world fiction. It also means the world is believable. This world has verisimilitude in spades. It's not only believable, it's interesting. It stands up to scrutiny. It even rewards scrutiny, and that's more important than all the giant mushrooms in the world. So yeah, I liked Morrowind. But I didn't get into this YouTube bracket to tell you about things I like. I got into it for the complaining, and I'm getting to that shortly. Because something happened to the Elder Scrolls series between 2002 and today. Nowadays, you'll often hear Bethesda's universe described as standard or generic. How could this be possible, you might wonder, given the depth and creativity of Morrowind? I'll tell you how. Oblivion, that's how. This brings us to part 3, Oblivion. Oblivion was a good game. Ha! Didn't see that coming, did you? But it was. It was well made, it was fun to play, and it had its memorable moments. If it were part 1 of a new series, I might be singing its praises right now. But it wasn't part 1 of another series, it was part 4 of an existing series. And taken in the context of the other games, it was a frustrating step backwards in too many ways. Before I tell you what I mean, I'm going to tell you how I think this happened. I suspect that sometime early in Oblivion's development, Bethesda painted themselves into a creative corner. They looked at a map of Tamriel and looked at the province of Cyrodiil, where Oblivion takes place. They saw that it was right in the middle, and so decided that Cyrodiil was going to be the normal place. Play a little of the game and you'll see what I mean. I mean generic, medieval, European. That appears to be the creative spark behind Oblivion's setting. Normal. This wasn't because of pre-established lore. Before we ever saw Cyrodiil, you could read about it in an in-game book called The Pocket Guide to the Empire. Here are some excerpts from the description of the province. Akaviri dragon motifs are found in all quarters, from the high minaret bridges of the imperial city to the paper Heiko skiffs that villagers use to wing their dead down the rivers. Thousands of workers ply the rice fields after the floodings, or clear the foliage of the surrounding jungle in the alternate seasons. Moth priests walk by in a cloud of ancestors. Newly arrived Western legionnaires sweat in the humid air. The Emperor watches over them all from the towers of the imperial city as dragons circle overhead. Damn, that place sounds cool. Like some crazy mashup of the Roman Empire and the Ming Dynasty. I can't wait to go there, sign me up. But that's not what we get. What we got was this. Generic, medieval, European. Normal. At this point you might be saying, what's wrong with normal? What's wrong with familiar? Does every game have to be set in some crazy volcano mushroom land? There are many problems with too much normal, not the least of which is that, paradoxically, it's strange credulity. Real life is never normal, nor is history. There's always a certain level of tension, weirdness, and anachronism. What's more, there's an absence of creative challenge. Creativity is often inspired by challenge, and when everything is generic and standard, there's nothing to be explained, justified, or expanded upon. Which means there's no real creative work to be done. This is a difficult thing to illustrate because I'm describing the absence of something rather than the presence of something. But here's one way to do it. Ask yourself some questions about Cyrodiil. Is there cultural or religious conflict? Is there injustice? Is there any conflict between haves and have-nots? Is there any political intrigue or economic struggle? In Morrowind, the answer to all of these questions is yes. In Oblivion, the answer is generally no. The things that make a setting interesting, that make it memorable, are too few and too far between. That's not to say that they're not there at all, they're just not there enough. So has Bethesda just lost its mojo? Is it doomed forevermore, never again to win the approval of random people on YouTube? No. There's hope. There's light. This brings us to part 4, Skyrim. Let's skip to the good part first, my ranking of the last 3 games. Skyrim was better than Oblivion, but still not quite as good as Morrowind. However, it represents a step in the right direction, a return to form. It has some of that flavory goodness that Morrowind had. I especially liked Markarth, the city built on a shameful secret, being torn apart by an age-old cultural grudge, and the Civil War, so full of conflicting motives and hidden agendas. This is a place I can believe in, a place I can immerse myself in. It wasn't perfect. I thought they played the Viking stuff a little too pat, and the game's signature edition, Dragons, is one of the most well-worn cliches in all of fantasy. But overall, the flavor was good. So, there's my verdict. Oblivion okay, Skyrim better, Morrowind best for the reasons described in the video. So is that it? Of course not. I have an agenda here. Now, I assume that right now, Bethesda's management has summoned all of their employees to an emergency meeting to watch this video to find out what my advice for them is. Well, I'm glad you're here, because I'm going to tell you about the thing that worries me most. You see, before Skyrim came out, I was hyped for it, like everyone else. I read just about every preview I could find, and from all those previews I learned the following things. 1. There will be dragons, and you can fight them both in the air and on the ground. 2. You can dual wield. 3. The leveling system is different. 4. There were over 70 bajillion handcrafted dungeons. This was frustrating to me because this wasn't the stuff I cared about. I wanted to know about the setting. 1. What is Nord culture like? 2. Will we learn about the history of Skyrim? 3. What's happened in the world since the events of Oblivion? 4. Will the game have that special quality that Morrowind had? That last one is the one I really want to know about. Fortunately, the journalists covering the game had my back. They were thoughtful enough to ask questions like, 1. Will there be spears? 2. Can we ride horses? 3. Can we maybe ride the dragons? 4. Remember that one time you guys released horse armor DLC? The impression I got from both the media coverage and Bethesda's own marketing was that no one really cared about the stuff I cared about. I was treated to a ton of information about the surface of the game and nearly nothing about what was underneath. Now maybe I'm being unreasonable here. Actually, I'm sure I am. I pride myself on being unreasonable. But if you think setting details are something that only a tiny subset of weirdos cares about, you're wrong. In fact, they're what people really respond to. People weren't hyped for Skyrim because there was dual wielding, or horses, or pretty looking menus. They were hyped because they wanted to be a goddamn Viking. They wanted to have a huge beard and a huge axe. They wanted to be able to knock people over by shouting at them. Remember this stuff? This is what we want. We want to immerse ourselves in the world you've built. We're looking for any avenue, any excuse to do so. We're looking for that door to close behind us so no one knows we were there. It's easy to lose track of this because it's not a feature that fits neatly into a press release or a TV spot. It's not something that can be quantified or put onto a back-of-the-box blurb. But that doesn't mean it's not important. I'm not saying you should neglect the mechanical aspects of your games. I'm saying that you shouldn't get caught up in the trend that's become too widespread all over the industry. Games making superficial technical advancements but regressing in terms of creativity and soul. Someday you're going to make an Elder Scrolls 6, or at least you'd better. And I don't want that game to be another Oblivion, because you are so close to making one for the ages. You're a whisker away. Do not blow this, Bethesda. Or I swear to God, I will make the longest, whiniest video ever. It'll be like 9 hours of unbroken nitpicking. Don't think I won't do it. I've been preparing my whole life for this. So help me God, I will... Part 5. Are we done yet? Yes, for now. Next up, I put on my black trench coat and my mirrored shades to fight an evil megacorporation. Also, the video will be about Cyberpunk. It may take 2 weeks. Over and out. Chummers. Trek.